Salve Maria! In today's video, we shall deal about a great personage of the Catholic Church in the 20th century. His life could be summed up in the following Latin words, which were his own motto: Da mihi animas cetera tolle. It means, give me souls and take the rest. This personage is the great Saint John Bosco, an ardent lover of souls who had guided many through the sacrament of confession. In order to guide him in his ministry, God granted him many supernatural gifts, such as dreams with a prophetic character. Therefore, let us reflect on certain incidents of Saint John Bosco that may help us to understand the character more deeply. Like the Good Shepherd, Don Bosco loved his boys in a very special way. This love was seen deeply in an incident during his life which was regarding a young boy named Charles. This particular young boy used to attend the oratory, which was a center of apostolate for children and youth started by Don Bosco. One day he fell seriously ill, and in a short time he was approaching death. The doctor informed the parents that the boy was in very critical condition and that they should see to his spiritual needs. When they asked their son which priest he wanted for his confession, he showed himself anxious to have Don Bosco, his ordinary confessor. Unfortunately, that day Don Bosco was out of town. Therefore, the assistant priest heard his confession. 36 hours later, the boy was dead. Before dying, repeatedly he had been asking for Don Bosco. As soon as Don Bosco returned to Turin, he was informed about this situation and immediately he went to see the boy. When he approached the house of Charles, a waiter first saw him and told him, "It's too late, he died 12 hours ago." Don Bosco replied, "It's just a misunderstanding. He is merely asleep. He just seems dead." The waiter stared at him with an air of ironic disbelief. Then afterwards, the boy's parents came and told him that poor Charles was truly dead. Then Don Bosco requested to take him near the dead body of the boy. He was immediately taken to the boy's room where his mother and an aunt were praying at his bedside. The body was already prepared for burial. A lamp was burning beside the bed. Don Bosco drew near the bed thinking, who knows whether his last confession was a good one? Where is his soul now? After asking the person who had guided him to the room to leave, Don Bosco recited a short, fervent prayer, blessed the dead body, and called to him twice in a tone of command, saying, "Charles, Charles, get up." The boy began to move and then opened his eyes as though awaking from a deep sleep, looked around him, then sat up and asked, "Where am I?" Finally, his gaze fell on Don Bosco. He was so happy that he said, "Oh, Don Bosco, it's a wonder I am not in hell, because in my last confession, I didn't confess a sin I had committed a couple of weeks before." Then the boy began to explain his experience after death. He said that after dying, he saw as if being taken to the edge of an immense furnace, and many devils had chased him. They were just about to push him over when a lady stepped between him and those ugly monsters, saying, "Wait, he has not yet been judged." He was terribly scared, and just then he heard Don Bosco calling him, and suddenly he woke up. Then he said that he wanted to make a good confession. The boy's mother and aunt, who had been present all the while, could not believe their eyes. They rushed out to call the rest of the family. Meanwhile, Charles had sufficiently recovered from his fear of the demons and began his confession with every sign of true contrition. Don Bosco was giving him absolution. His mother and the rest of the family walked into the room. Turning to his mother, Charles said, "Don Bosco is saving me from hell." Among other things, he repeatedly asked Don Bosco to warn the boys always to tell all their sins in confession. At last, Don Bosco said to him, "Now you are in the state of grace and heaven stands open for you. Do you want to go there or remain here with us?" "I want to go to heaven," replied the boy. "Goodbye then until we meet in heaven," continued Don Bosco. Thereupon, young Charles closed his eyes, lay back on his pillow, and quietly fell asleep again. From this experience of Don Bosco, one easily draws the lesson that a confession made well opens for us heaven and saves us from eternal damnation. It is therefore a sacrament that helps us to live well. Don Bosco on every month let his boys make spiritual retreat called the exercise of a happy death, and he told them to take special care to make their confession as if it were the last one of their lives. This exercise was no reason for fear or sadness, but an encouragement to live their young life in a holy way. As we mentioned before, Saint John Bosco is also known for his many prophetic dreams. His most famous dream regarding the future troubles for the church, which is known as the prophecy of the two columns, is quite outstanding. Don Bosco saw himself before a massive ocean. The sea was covered with great number of ships in battle formation. All were heavily armed with cannons, bombs and firearms of all sorts and were heading towards one massive ship, mightier than all of them. As they were coming close, they tried to attack, set it fire and cripple it at as much as possible. The winds and waves seemed to be favorable to the enemy. In the midst of this endless sea, two solid columns, a short distance apart, soared high into the sky. Upon one column, there was a statue of the Immaculate Virgin, at whose feet a large inscription written, "Mary, help of Christians." Upon the other, one could see a host of proportionate size, and beneath there was an inscription which was written as "Salvation of Believers." The commander of this great ship was the Pope. Having seen the enemy's fury and the situation of his auxiliary ships, he called his captains to a conference. However, as they discussed their strategy, a furious storm breaks out and they return to their ships. When the storm calmed, the Pope again called his captains, but the storm rages again. Standing at the helm, the Pope strains every muscle to steer his ship between the two columns, from whose summits hang many anchors and strong hooks linked to the chains. The entire enemy ship closes in to intercept and sink this mighty ship with all their effort. They bombarded it with everything they had. The battle raged even more furiously. Meanwhile, enemy cannons blew up, firearms and beaks fall to pieces, ships crack up and sank to the bottom. In blind fury, the enemy entered into hand-to-hand combat, cursing and blaspheming. Suddenly, the Pope fell. He was seriously wounded. He instantly stood up, but having been struck down a second time, he died. A shout of victory rose from the enemy, but as soon as he died, another Pope took his place. The captains of the auxiliary ships elected him so quickly that the news of the Pope's death coincides with that of his successor's election. Breaking through all the resistance, the new Pope steered his ship safely between the two columns, first to one of the sacred host and then to the other, topped by the statue of the Virgin Mary. At this point, something unexpected happened. The enemy ships panic and go away, knocking on each other. Some auxiliary ships, which had gallantly fought alongside their flagship, are the first to tie up at the two columns. Many other ships that fearfully kept far away from the fight were waiting until the enemy ships left. Then they too went towards the two columns to tie up at the swinging hooks and ride safe and tranquil beside their flagship. And now a great calmness covered the sea. And in conclusion to this dream, Don Bosco said that very grave trials await the church. What the church has suffered so far is almost nothing compared to what is going to happen. The enemies of the church are symbolized by the ships which strive their utmost to sink the flagship. Only two things can save us in such a grave moment: devotion to Mother Mary and frequent communion. He said that we should use these two means at our very best and to encourage others to these devotions. Many interpret St. John Bosco's vision as regarding the trials the church has endured and is continuing to endure at the dawn of the third millennium, namely rampant secularism and apostasy, which has led to the attacks against the church and her teachings. How many evil men despise and attack the teachings of the church? How many Catholics suffer tremendous persecutions in our days for the sake of their faith, and our grief increases even after seeing the mediocrity and indifference of the very sons and daughters of the church itself. But we should never lose hope. Following the example of Don Bosco, let us make a firm resolution of not allowing a single day to pass without making some effort to grow in love and devotion towards the Holy Eucharist and the Blessed Virgin Mary. Also, let us frequent the sacrament of confession and purify our souls from sin. Doing so, we may be able to partake in the victory promised by Our Lady in Fatima. In the end, my Immaculate Heart will triumph. If you like our videos, please do subscribe to our channel, and also please do consider in supporting our channel by using the link below. May God bless you. Salve Maria.